Alright, Bismillah, in the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. So, well, I discussed my topic, or the research or the dissertation topic with some of you. So basically, so my topic deals with the spiritual resources in a secular context. So how when a secular, aggressive secularism was enforced on people in the context of Turkey, how they survived. Today, and again, there is really, in some cases, there is even a concern that either Turkey is getting more conservative or gets more religious, more spiritual, and to what extent the Nur gatherings, the study circles, plays a role in the spirituality of people in a secular context. So this is really the umbrella topic. But of course, I will not be able to cover everything here. So what I will do, basically, to put the emergence of the Nur studies, the study circles, into context, and then actually to do some comparison with the Great Awakening in America. So some major figures, and see how we will end up with discussions. So the context, the emergence of Nur circles, and then the Great Awakening in America, so how we can relate to. And the good thing, since this is a diverse gathering, I hope it will be helpful to have a fruitful discussion. So again, just briefly, for those who are not familiar with the the Republican context, and when there was, in the beginning, in 19th century, beginning of 20th century, there was a concern about the state of Muslim Ummah. So how can we re-emerge within the situation that is way behind of the West? And one idea was, well, we need to reform ourselves, and in some cases we need to reform our religion. So this basically was the major theme. So, and then one position was that, well, maybe nationalism would be helpful for us, as it was helpful in Europe, because with the nation states, they were able to push the church behind, and making progress in science and technology. The other position in the Ottoman context was Islam. So maybe, and again, the idea was that, well, if you look at the history of Islam, as long as whenever Muslims, they were very attached to their religion, their tradition, their history, they were very progressive in science, in technology, ahead of the West. And the last position was known as Westernists, those who very much in pro-Western culture and education. The idea was that we need to really push Islam back, detach ourselves from the Islamic roots, and hopefully this will help us to re-emerge from the ashes. And there is lots of literature about this, with especially early 20th century intellectuals using religious language, not in order to promote religion, but in order to deal with religion, to remove religion from the society. For example, the word creed, is usually associated with with a religious discourse. But actually, in this context, the creed was a way, using this word in order to disassociate yourself with religion. And one of the famous poem written by Tevfik Fikret is called Halukun Amentusu, the creed of Haluk, which is, there is nothing. There is nothing about a religious creed, but rather disassociation with religion. And of course, this was the background of actually the reforms in the Republican, which the ideology, and then actually it emerged in the form of Kemalist ideology. So the more concrete forms of these ideologies that very much against religion was to at the end emerge as closing all the madrasas, Sufi lodges, foundations. So anything that is really associated with religion was the result of this ideology that to some extent I would say came from the West. And one of the result of this reform was to actually to centralize the education. And in the Ottoman context, when it comes to religious education, it is more or less, and I know from the eastern part, it was a private education. So with these reforms, of course, the process was very painful actually for Muslims in Turkey, because even a private gathering, even a private religious gathering was forbidden. So there is actually a very well-known saying or story from one of Nursi's students. So actually whenever they would attend until 1960s, whenever they would attend a study circle, which basically you gather and you read the Risale, so the possibility of going back to your home was 50%. Either you would go back to the jail if you were caught, either jail or you return to home. So there's 50% of. So the idea is a very aggressive pressure, secularism on people who were longing for their spirituality. And of course, considering the background, it is there is spirituality, madrasas, Sufi lodges, deeply rooted in the society. But all of a sudden, there is a disconnection with all these religious institutions. And actually, Nursi comes in a way, and again, this argument is put forward by Sharif Mardin as well, that he comes in a way to fill the gap actually. So to fill the gap in the context of the situation. So there is a great thirst for spirituality because of the lack of institutions, and Nursi comes actually and forms a method in a way that works for the context of time. So maybe we'll discuss whether it is his method, which still advocated by his followers, was just for the context of his time, or still it is valid. So we'll discuss this with some questions. And the other thing, and what is, to me, what is the most interesting about Nursi and his writing, although he forms a method that works for an aggressive, secular, let's say, government, still it doesn't mean that the secular government was very comfortable with his method. It is a unique method. It is a new way. The idea is that just let us together, to do our readings. But still, as you know from his biography, for much of his life he was exiled, imprisoned. So still the method, there is putting the method into context that works for the environment, it was not very helpful actually for Nursi and his followers. And the other thing you see, one of the things that we have in the state, the number of the nuns, those who are disassociating themselves with religion, their numbers are increasing. And again, there are different explanations for this, and one of them is that the new generation, millennials, they don't like to be associated with hierarchy. They don't like to be associated with institutions. And actually, Nursi forms a method in a way, and again, still, like, in order to make this like a strong argument, there is much study needs to be done. It works very much actually for the millennials, the method of just because it is extremely a text-based center. There is no a center figure today. Even although there are in the media there are some figures or leaders in the Nur community, but it is extremely difficult to associate the Nur community just with one leader. I mean, at least this is how the Nur community would define itself. And just from the picture, I mean, most of them you will see from, I don't know if it is clear from you. I mean, this is youth, and I think in the Western context, this is extremely unusual. This is not a conference, this is not a seminar. It is just a weekly gathering on a regular basis. And people, I mean, there is no awards, there is no entertainment. And basically, it is like very monotonous. You come and people, they read, and all this, youth, young folks, they come and listen like for hours. So I think it is extremely unusual in the Western context. People, they come, and there is no, again, no membership, no registration, no hierarchy. You can't have anyone next to you. So in this context, it seems that this Nursi's methodology, the dersane methodology, might be a new thing actually for the millennials. Might work very much for their perceptions. And the other thing that is important for us just to highlight, that Nursi does not focus on the usual literature that historically would be focused by an Islamic scholar. For example, jurisprudence. You barely actually see any section in the Risale that Nursi really goes deep into it, do a lot of discussions. He does not go into this. This is very interesting. But what he does actually is so much focus, so much concentration on the condition, on the state of human beings. Really, what does it mean to be human being? I mean, if you really, from my understanding, if let's say, if there is anything that we say, okay, this is the gist of the Risale, it will be Nursi's concern for the state of human beings. What does it mean to be a human being in relation to God, to the Creator? So much, for example, focus on narcissism. How can we deal with narcissism? And I am sure if Nursi would live in our time, it's likely that he would write a treatise on iPhones and iPads in relation to our state, because he has a risala called Ana, and ego, or the self. And he extensively wrote on weakness, that how we are weak, how we are fragile. And again, it will be interesting again to summarize. It seems that from Nursi's point of view, when it comes to human beings, because it seems it is so difficult for them to settle, although there is so much progress, there is so much prosperity. In the Risale, there he echoes the idea that if you really want to be happy, or in other way, happiness, to understand that there is no happiness in this world. So once you understand there is no happiness in this world from Nursi's perspective, then this is the state that you become a happy person. So it is a very, again, interesting perspective, considering that the direction of the millennials in our time. So that how can we relate this to the comparison that I mentioned in the context of U.S., the Great Awakening? So one of the things is, again, you will see in the picture, Nursi actually, the way his method helps masses access spirituality easily. So what does it mean? For example, in the study circles, I mean, it is not an unusual thing to see someone who is, who did his PhD in economy, but also leading the session, or an engineer, but becomes a very influential member of the community in feeding people's spirituality. Again, this is also, I will say, it's very unusual because, again, in the minds of, again, historically, but also in the Western context, it is usually a theology, someone who is well versed in spirituality, likely to have a degree in theology. This is the person who can help people, to emerge in a spirituality. But actually, Nursi changes this direction to some extent. Again, this will be an argument, and not many of you may agree with it. He actually removes the religious authority, basically. He puts aside the religious authority, the religious scholars' authority, and that's why I think it's very interesting that the main opposition in Turkey to the Risale circuit, the Nursi, was from religious authorities. I mean, still there is, if you think of the theological schools in Turkey, still there is way less interest in Nursi studies. And again, this is, we may argue for different reasons, but what I understand that it is because he asked even a religious scholar to come and bow down with his brothers just to promote his or her spirituality. So in his perspective, in his method, no one is special. So how then to come to the great awakening in America? If you look at the early years of in the early 18th century in America, Jonathan Edwards or George Whitefield, who was also an Anglican, they come actually. They make spirituality access to masses. As again, the story, I think it is very similar to the story of the Nur community, in the sense that both of them actually, both movements, they talk about revivalism. And again, actually, this is the word revivalism or revival is a constant word actually in the Great Awakening literature. And what is interesting also, as you see in case of, I think, Jonathan Edwards, there is so much opposition actually from the conservative movements against his style, his movement, and the reason because he does something very unusual. He make it simple, he make it easy, and it's much easier for people to understand, to relate to it. And actually, to some extent, this is what Nursi has done in the Turkish context. Make it more simple. You don't need to really study like 40 years in a madrasa in order to have a spiritual strength or be able to a good servant of God. He says, well, there is a much easier way. And the other thing, for example, in the audience, when it comes to George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards, in both cases, you see a very diverse audience when they preach. And the same case actually with Nursi, and the audience is extremely diverse. I mean, regardless of their education, gender, hierarchy. So everyone is actually part of part of their method. The last thing that I would like to, maybe it will be easier to relate to Nursi's method. There is actually a very famous Buddhist story. So apparently, according to this Eastern story, there is a person who, in the battlefield, he was shot, about to die, and then there is a chest through his. There is an arrow through his chest, and someone comes. They want to take him. To cure. They want to remove him from the field and in order to cure him. And actually, he reacts. First, he says, "Tell me about the process. What happened to me? Tell me from which direction the arrow came. Tell me the details. Who did this? All that." Like he asks lots of questions. And the person who wants to cure him, he says, "Well, if I tell you all the details, you will die. What matters now is your treatment." So basically, this is, I will say, this story summarizes Nursi's concern very much. He did not, in his methodology, did not so much concern with Sharia. Let's bring, let's deal with the state. Let's bring Sharia as much as as soon as we can, or jurisprudence, details. For he goes, actually, he's so much concerned with faith, and he believes that this is the root cause. Once we fix the problems around faith, then it is likely we will fix the problems in our society. Thank you for your attention.